Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm your host, Mira Rubin, and I am delighted to introduce you to Lauren Lembo, a professional archaeologist, artist, and herbalist. Lauren is the owner and founder of Blue Fox Botanicals, a New Jersey-based company producing vegan skincare solutions and herbal formulas that are sustainably cultivated, fair trade, locally produced, ethically packaged, and palm oil free. Lauren's background in archaeology and anthropology inform her practice of herbalism, where she combines traditional uses of plant medicine with evolving scientific study. Lauren, welcome. It's so good to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a delight. I'm really excited to explore the relationship for you as a professional archaeologist with your practice of herbalism and what the connections might be. So maybe we can start there.
Okay. So by and large, if you're a human being and you're on this planet, you have ancestors that have worked with plants. Doesn't matter what part of the world. Everyone historically has worked with plants on some level. And it's not just for food, although I do believe food is medicine, but people employ different plant materials and fungi as well for overall wellness, for the treatment of various conditions. And so a lot of these traditional practices that you see globally do still persist, and they inform our knowledge base now, despite the fact that we are in a largely science-based society, at least in the Western Hemisphere. What we know from what people have been practicing for thousands of years is still viable, it's relevant, and it's important to keep these traditions alive.
Which came first for you, herbalism or archaeology and anthropology?
That's a great question. So, you know what? It was kind of circuitous. Some minor background about myself. I was a very sick child. I suffered from severe seasonal allergies, childhood asthma. I ran like the full gamut of pharmaceuticals at a really young age to keep that in check. And some of it was life-saving, but also as time went on, when I went through my teens, some of the effects of them, I wanted to find ways that were less invasive to my overall being, that were more natural. Try to find different solutions that work for me to really get it under control and manage it without the need to always be consuming these pharmaceutical medications, which can have very serious adverse effects, especially over the long term. So I had that going on for me. And then sort of at the same time, I also had this passion for history. I started, I think, my life after college as an artist and graphic designer, but always had that burning passion. And I was also an art educator. And just the turn of events, the way that things are meant to be, I ended up deciding to get involved with local archaeology. And that led to a master's degree in anthropology after my master's in education. And I ended up working in cultural resource management and different local organizations and nonprofit societies for the past 10 or so years. And within that time period, was always studying and interested in plant medicine and mushroom medicine, mostly just for myself and for family and friends. Some of this was informed by anthropological studies, reading different journals, and what we know from the archaeological record, which can be difficult at times, especially the region that we live in, because so much of plant material does get lost, unfortunately, through time. But some of it does remain, particularly with starch grain analysis. So reading these studies about the different plants even that people used here and how that connects with this overall study of plant medicine elsewhere really kind of came together. And then when I decided to open a business, it was mostly because I saw the benefit of it. And, being vegan, I also found that I personally could not find any products that I could recommend to other people that were also herbal, that were sustainable, that were ethical, that were all natural, without the heavy use of essential oils, which I know we'll get into in a bit. So I decided to open this business so that I could be able to reach other people that were like-minded, like me, or that needed that solution that they weren't finding in what was already available, especially commercially. And so it's my passion project. I should also say that I'm also within the historic preservation field still, and I work for a Cultural and Heritage Commission. So Blue Fox Botanicals is my love. It's my gift. It's my way of trying to help people do less harm, not just to their bodies, but to the planet and different, communities globally, and to be mindful of purchasing decisions and how that affects all of us.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I have so many questions. I think that because you have this background in anthropology and archaeology, a question that I want to ask is related to herbalism. What is the most interesting tidbit you uncovered that really kind of maybe rocked your world, if anything, in archaeological study or anthropological study?
One thing it's so hard to say just one thing. There's a couple, I guess when I first learned, and this isn't the region that I work in, but archaeologically that the first evidence for distillation of plant material that we know of was found in the Indus Valley, which is like present day Pakistan, 4,000 years ago. That, wow. At least probably more, that people were working with, these different engineering methods to sort of, extract the plant material that was desirable, largely for perfumes, but also for medical benefits. And it's just astounding to think how long even those mechanized traditions had originated, because I think there's always this concept that it's just, someone in the woods making a poultice or a tea, and which is still amazing, and I do that all the time. But to see how early on it was starting to be, even before true industrialization, that people were thinking about ways that they could tap into more of those beneficial components of plants. So that was one thing. And then also just going back to the different, mushroom materials that have been found archaeologically, and this sort of like old school concept that's just there because it's in the environment and, whatever, it's happenstance. But then seeing different, studies and excavations in other parts of the world where you have that higher degree of preservation, where they're actually finding these more intact mushrooms with the preserved bodies of human beings. And it's showing you that these mushrooms weren't necessarily edible in the way that you think of like eating for culinary. They're being used for other purposes, and it's not just for tinder. There was an understanding going back a really long time of the sorts of beneficial components that things in nature had, and their therapeutic effects to the human body. So, those are like a couple sort of loose examples, but overall, yeah, it's always humbling when you realize how little we still know, even with science, compared to what people were able to figure out thousands of years ago, that we're still using today. that is still somehow more valid than even some of the studies that come out.
I love that. And, it brings to mind to me I want to say maybe the counterpoint between science and nature that we've kind of embroiled ourselves in our contemporary culture. And I think finally we're starting to get a movement back to the connection to nature. The herbalists that I know talk about the plants talking and educating them, the learning the medicine from the plants, rather than our kind of scientific idea of our dominant knowledge, that we can dominate nature, or that we can subjugate nature, or we can harness nature, rather than collaborating. And it just sounds to me like one of the things that you're finding is that human beings have had a collaborative relationship with nature for centuries and centuries and centuries. And now maybe we're finding our way back to that.
Yeah, thankfully, it's about time, and it is a very important relationship for us. But something that you just touched upon, that sort of it being a relationship that should be respected, and I think unfortunately a lot of that got lost through just this globalization of the economy and sort of rampant capitalism and, this sort of ongoing quest to exploit things that can offer profit because of a supply and demand system. And here's where it's really interesting, because this is where it ties into those traditions. And again, I'll say science can be incredibly valid,
100%.
but 100%. But there's traditions and experiences that people have had in sacred relationships with plants and mushrooms since like the beginning of human beings. And unfortunately, some of those traditions are falling to the wayside in areas where these plant materials that they've worked with for generations are being so heavily exploited by commercial big business entities that they're losing their stronghold and their say on their ancestral land. And that insight that they're able to offer in sustainable management of that environment is unfortunately being lost. And then that then ties into poverty. It ties into this overall climate change situation that we're in globally. It ties into the threatening and extinction of different plant species and resources, and it funds warfare. I mean, there's so many different, losses that occur when, I think people by and large, and again, it's usually big industry, but it's, something the consumer should be mindful of as well, because your decision in what you purchase is sort of like a vote for or against those sorts of systems. And so that's something that I think is really interesting and maybe not discussed as frequently as it could be.
I think that's a really good segue into a conversation around essential oils, because you and I had a little bit of this conversation previous to this interview. And essential oils, I think they've grown in popularity so that many, many, many people have an awareness of what essential oils are in the first place, which I'd like to discuss for those who don't know what they are. And it's a way that so many people have been able to connect to a broader experience of natural medicine. Mm-hmm. And so you have a different take on this, on the whole idea of essential oils. And I would appreciate it if you could sort of give us a foundation understanding of what essential oils are. And then let's talk about the sourcing of them and the sustainability aspect.
Okay. So essential oils are pretty much how they sound. They're extracted volatile oils that are coming from the plant material. And the process is basically distillation, steam distillation in a still People can do this if they have a copper still. So I will say that there are local herbalists that do this way more sustainably than large scale commercialization and big business does. But basically what it is you're using a condenser and then it's splitting the plant material into its water base and its oil base. And so the water base is a hydrosol, which is still medicinal. And then the other part is the essential oil. And so I certainly don't demonize essential oils. I work with them sometimes, very sparingly. They definitely serve a purpose, but there are major sustainability, ethical, and safety issues involved with purchasing them and working with them, especially if it's going to be from, a large scale global distributor. So I'm not sure if you want me to go into sort of the overall sustainability issues first with the plant materials themselves, which I might as well, because put it this way, you need so much plant material in order to extract these essential oils. So just an example, you need like 250 pounds of lavender to make 16 ounces of essential oil. So pounds. So if you think of that as far as monoculturing, how much land, how much resources, water, fertilizer, all the different factors that go into what's required to cultivate that amount.
That's crazy.
That. And then so people doing this, locally from their farms is one thing because they're usually doing it on such a small scale. But then when you're extrapolating this into, a national or global market, and you think about, how much material it needs, to sustain that business and to turn their profit, it's astounding. So then you get into issues with certain types of plants, or specifically like the resins or the gums. So think frankincense and myrrh, very popular. But unfortunately, where these materials are coming from, by and large, is Somalia, Ethiopia, desert environments. You're seeing communities of people being displaced, being essentially forced into indentured servitude by big business that's owning their land. And then whenever there's a drought, there's, more poverty, there's even more sacrifice of ethics and standards. And then that all gets brought into the essential oil realm, because those are the companies that are sort of doing this to that landscape. And then you also have a threatened and endangered species issue with just over harvesting in general. So it's multiple fold. But the good news is that there are companies down there that are fair trade. There are ones that do exist where people are more in control of their land. They have more of a say. They're being somewhat more respected. Fair trade takes a lot of money to get that certification, so does organic. So being mindful of whether an essential oil is fair trade or organic is major. So sometimes I find that the more that you're interested in something, the more you research it, the more you sometimes, unfortunately, find things that about a company or about a practice that don't necessarily agree well with your core values. And of course, everyone's different as far as like what those values are for themselves. But I think for me, honestly, it started with outside the realm of essential oils. It was in looking at different vegan products out there before I even had my business, and seeing that candelilla wax was being used instead of beeswax. And then I kind of just on my own decided to go down this rabbit hole of being like, okay, well, what is this? What is this from? What's the process? I guess it was a little bit of curiosity. And also I think just my field of study by nature, I'm somewhat skeptical or critical or trying to look at different angles. So in learning about this particular wax, learn that it comes from a desert plant in Mexico, that unlike, cacao or cocoa butter or shea butter, it's processed using sulfuric acid without PPE. It's done with, children as young as 10 years old.
Wow.
And some people die and get hurt and get seriously burnt. And then this sulfuric acid gets dumped back into the desert environment, and not being able to, I don't work with it at all, because in researching it, I was not able to find someone who was organic, probably because they use sulfuric acid. And I was not able to find anyone who was fair trade. So just those aspects of it grossed me out. And they also touched upon this in, I think, a BBC docuseries called Beauty Laid Bare, that goes to different parts of the world and sort of exposes some of the truths behind some of the most common ingredients in, cosmetics, and again, like big industry stuff. So, so with essential oils, I knew from years ago how much material it took to make them. And in some of the coursework that I was taking is sort of how, my eyes were opened into, not just the cost in water, land, and resources, but then you get into the cost of life, of ancient traditions, of people whose land has been taken or who are being oppressed by the system. And again, I'm not saying all essential oils and all plant materials, but just being mindful of which ones and doing some research first, because odds are you can find different alternatives to almost anything. It's not like there's this one plant that only does this and that's that. There's always something else that you can find that's, not endangered or not threatened or, cultivated or processed in a way that's fair trade and organic. So those are the two things that I really look for, is organic and fair trade. Not saying that someone not having that stamp of approval, it means that they don't, but that's really only local people that have a farm that are doing it small scale. They're using a copper still. They're not on the same level as, an international supplier. So
you said you had told me that you had heard about a company that was actually engaging in illegal practices. Like what did you learn?
So I learned that, and this is just one company, but several companies have been caught actually like harvesting and working with and selling plants that are endangered, that, plants that are illegal to be commercially harvesting, things like rosewood and spikenard, and, basically plants that are protected because of overharvesting, because they're almost gone. And, there's some weirdness with cartels being involved at times. It's just this crazy industry that has so many ugly aspects to it if you're not looking closely enough, because there is such a high demand for essential oils because people are turning to nature more, which is fantastic. But it's like whenever this happens, you always have that group of people at the top that see an opportunity to make money. And oftentimes that's at the expense of the planet and people. So just being mindful of where these things are coming from. And,
as you're saying that, it brings to mind the poaching industry and things like rhinoceros horn. But here we're talking about plants. It never occurred to me that the same kinds of subterfuges might be occurring in what on the surface looks like a wholesome industry.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that's mind-blowing. Like, talk about mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing, and it's very disconcerting. actually. Like here are people that are using essential oils are typically woke, in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
right? And yet it wouldn't have occurred to me to even think that there were nefarious motivations behind some of these things, so we don't know what we don't know. And then you start digging into the rabbit hole and it's like, oh wow, now what? So my question to you is, obviously if we want to be responsible, we want to be looking more deeply, if we're going to be using essential oils, into how they're sourced. But what kind of alternatives are there available to us?
There's alternatives. So, and I will say too, before getting to that, I'm not demonizing essential oils in and of themselves. It's just do your research before working on them, to anybody who's listening. But let's say that there's another option, one that's more sustainable, ethical, one that you can control and be actively involved with, and one that's safer. And I can get into the safety once I explain it. But great reveal, it's oil infusions or oil extractions, and it's different, totally different than essential oils. What it is you're taking fresh or dried plant material, usually dried, and infusing it in oil, like extra virgin olive oil, grapeseed oil, for face or lips, sensitive areas, or people prone to acne. Jojoba oil is a great one. Again, fair trade, organic, look at that with the oils also. But what it's doing is it's making you more in control of the process. It's fresh. It's not as concentrated as essential oils. Essential oils are 100 times stronger than the singular plant itself, which might sound really appealing to some people. But over the long term, especially topically, even at a dilution that's safe, you have to think of dosage, and dosage isn't necessarily one time. It's over a period of time. So the longer you use essential oils, the more prone you are for having an allergic reaction or some sort of irritation from them. So what a fresh oil infusion does is it gives you this benefit of the therapeutic properties of this plant, but cuts out those major safety concerns. So let me give an example of one in particular. So broadleaf plantain,
yay,
we love, which we've talked about. So this is considered a weed. It's, people mow it all the time. It's all over the place, and it's free, but it's also highly beneficial. It has properties that act like anti-inflammatories. It can help with, wounds, bug bites, has antiseptic properties. It's one of those amazing free all around you plants that is so overlooked that I use every single day of my life, all the time. So what I would do is, just to walk you through like an example process. So
that would be great.
Say I want to, make a salve or a butter or a balm or something like that, something I can put topically on my skin. And I harvest broadleaf plantain. I only really take what I need at a time, and then I dry it out. You can dehydrate it. You could do it by air. You could do it in the oven. But using dry herbs, depending on what they are, is usually better because once you combine it with the oil, it's a little bit more shelf stable, a year to 2 years, depending on what it is. But I tend to use the oils faster than that. I usually only make what I need at a time. Something like jewelweed, you want to do that when it's fresh because that's how those, constituents or those beneficial components within that plant work. Is it's better fresh than dried. But anyway, broadleaf.
What I have to ask, I know we're talking about plantain, which is one of my favorite things.
Sorry, I went on a tangent.
No, that's okay. But you mentioned jewelweed, and I'm wondering, it's all over the place where I am. I'm wondering how it's used, what for.
So funny enough, I would use jewelweed in combination with broadleaf plantain a lot of the times. Jewelweed is sort of a go-to for poison ivy rash relief.
Really?
But it's also found, so it contains saponins. So what's found in some studies with jewelweed is that It can also act as a preventative, possibly, to rash outbreak with poison ivy. And it can also help with inflammation in general. So with rashes that aren't even necessarily caused by poison ivy, but jewelweed tends to be combined a lot with poison ivy relief. They grow in similar environments. Oftentimes you find them side by side with one another. With jewelweed in particular, why I went on a tangent is that one, if you do an oil infusion of it, it's better when it's fresh. Because that, like, if you break open the stem, you'll feel that there's sort of like, almost like aloe, this sort of mucilaginous, like kind of gel that comes out. And that's sort of what you want when you're doing an oil infusion with that particular plant.
So let me just ask one more question about that. Are you talking about topical use only, or are you talking about ingesting as well?
Predominantly topical use, but you can ingest an oil infusion. I mean, think about what people do with, infusing olive oil with garlic or peppers or that sort of thing. So this is something that you can do with a plant, of course, obviously one that's safe to ingest, but that is one great benefit of it too. Whereas essential oils, it doesn't matter what anyone tells you, I really, 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 really strongly do not recommend anyone ever ingesting them, even the tiniest amount, just because it's so potent. It can cause liver toxicity. You don't have to worry about that with a freshly made oil infusion, and you can tailor it to your liking. So if you're talking something that you want to ingest, olive oil, grapeseed oil, those are really my two main go-tos.
You don't use coconut oil?
Not really. I use coconut oil in some topical blends, but I find that just working with grapeseed oil or extra virgin olive oil tends to be a little bit easier for me because of the consistency with the oil. It's easier for me to measure and to get into a jar, because usually what I'll do is I'll take that plant material, I'll put it in a mason jar, and then I'll pour the oil on top. So you could, if coconut oil, you want to melt it first and do this, but I just pour the oil on top, and just enough to cover whatever plant you're using. Breaking it up is better, because it creates more surface area. So once it's covered like that, there's two different ways that you can do this. You can, put a lid on it, seal it, put it out in a place that gets a lot of sun, and let it sit for about like 4 to 6 weeks. I tend not to do that, just because usually when I'm making this, I'm making it for more immediate needs. So in that case, what I'll do is I'll just put the jar in top of a double boiler. And then I'll put the heat on for maybe like 3 or 4 hours, a little bit longer, depending on what it is. If it's something like barky or resinous or woody, I'll do it for a little bit longer than that. But I keep it at a low enough temperature that, the water below is like gently simmering, but not boiling too much. Good rule of thumb is like if you take the temperature from within about 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. You certainly don't want to get to like the boiling point of the oil, even though that's like really high, but something sort of modest like that. And then you just strain it, and then you have your oil. And then the great thing is that if you do this with a few different types of plants, you can combine them into, a healing blend, like a balm. So jewelweed and plantain would be great in combination, because they help with inflammation, with rashes, with itching. I also love yarrow. Yarrow is a great healer. So with combination of all three of them, you're getting an even better edge. And these are some of the ingredients that I use in a wound care salve that I make. And I put it on as soon as I get bit by a mosquito, as soon as I get stung. It's really the only thing that helps me. I know I might sound biased because I'm making it myself, but honestly, it's the only thing that really works for me. And it's not me, it's the plants. It's 100% the plants and how incredible and helpful they are. And what's great about this is you're more in connection too with the process. And, if you believe what I believe, that there is like a spiritual element to this, and having that connection with nature, you're creating that relationship and that respect, and you're more actively involved with your own healing, and through that you're gaining an experience with plants and the ecosystem, and working in harmony with it. And that's something that buying an essential oil off of Amazon is not going to give you. And again, everyone, your body, your choice. Everyone has different needs. Essential oils can be very therapeutic, in aromatherapy in particular. They offer amazing benefits and can often be safer and, of course, more natural than pharmaceuticals or drugstore drugs. So but just being mindful that there's this other process of working with plants, which are oil extractions or oil infusions, that can be done at home very easily, very cost effective, and tend to be safer, something that you can ingest. So
are this might be a really stupid question, but are oil extractions and oil infusions the same thing?
Yeah, they're the same thing. It is an extraction because it's extracting those beneficial components from the plant material, those compounds that are helpful. But I call it an infusion also because it is like you're infusing the oil. A lot of people refer to infusions as strictly like water-based. Like you think of tea, right?
Right.
It's if you steep any plant for 10 to 15 minutes in boiling water, that's an infusion. It's a water infusion. It's a different process. It's just like a nomenclature thing.
Okay.
I just always preferred to call them infusions, but they are synonymous.
So I wonder, again, I said that plantain, broadleaf plantain, and longleaf, is it the other one? It's also a weed. It's one of my favorite things. It's just a magical plant. And the way that I have used it, because I didn't have the knowledge that you're sharing, is that if I wounded myself, bruised myself, cut myself, burned myself, I would take some of the leaf and I would chew it up. And by the way, it tastes like mushrooms a bit, and it can be used in salads. And I would chew it up and use it as a poultice.
And that's great. I do the same thing. So that is a fantastic way of using it. That freshness. Yeah, that's incredible.
So the thing I want to ask you is, when you compare something like that poultice with the oil infusion that I would use topically, what is the difference in efficacy? Because I just want to share one example. I injured my ankle really badly, like really, really badly. And I made a poultice of the broadleaf plantain, put it on my ankle. And it's the weirdest thing that I've noticed when I've used it, is that the pain would become concentrated and excruciating, and then it would disappear. And that happened with my ankle. It happened with an injury where I had scraped my arms really badly. They both got very, very raw and bruised. And I covered them with plantain, and I could watch them healing before my eyes. And the pain went away. After getting worse, it went away. And through the rest of the healing, first of all, it healed really rapidly. And through the rest of the healing, there was no pain at all.
That's pretty incredible what you're mentioning. And that really shows like an incredible connection with that plant. And that's the sort of experiences that I think are so valuable in finding out like what works for you. As far as efficacy, it's really hard to say because, this hasn't been studied too much. And I think it's different for different people. So kind of what you're saying now is, I think, falls in line with like what a lot of people would probably agree with, like utilizing that plant fresh as soon as you're harvesting it, and just like really laying it on is going to probably be of best benefit. But when you're also heating something, you are also getting different types of compounds from it. So it's really hard to say, because everyone's a little bit different, like what's going to work better than something else. Sort of like you, if I have a choice, I'm going to use the plant, assuming it's safe to do so, because some do need to go through some sort of a process depending on the species. But something like that, if I'm out in the woods and I see jewelweed and I've just brushed up against poison ivy, like I'm going to use that, and it's going to have an incredible benefit because it's being freshly harvested. So I'd be curious to see, though, like if you could kind of do an experiment for yourself to do an oil infusion with broadleaf plantain. Not saying I want you to be injured or anything like that, but next time, hopefully never or anytime soon, but if something does happen, do like a comparison and see if and then get back to me, because I'd be really curious to hear like what the oil infusion did compared to the fresh plant material. Well, I tend to use the oil infusion more, and it works for me, so I never really thought about comparing the two, so that's interesting.
It's been so dramatic that I have thought how cool it would be to grind it up and somehow utilize it in potentially a face cream, because what it does for the skin that's injured is remarkable. I'm wondering what it might do to to fine lines and wrinkles, for example. Like I've been wanting to try it out for that because I imagine that it would be a remarkable skin cream.
Mm-hmm. I could definitely see that. So what you would do is infuse it. And again, it's different for everyone. I personally, the oils that I use for basically from here down tends to be different than my face. I have very sensitive skin, like incredibly sensitive skin. So I'm like a good barometer for if there's something, chemical that slipped into something. But, so like jojoba oil is one that I prefer for lips, face, because it tends to be a little bit less heavy and not clog pores in the same way that maybe some of the, coconut oil even, or extra virgin olive oil do. So at least on your face, I should say. So if you did an infusion with jojoba oil of broadleaf plantain, that's something I could see, very feasibly being used as a lip balm, as a daily face cream. I do that with elderflower. I even do that with different types of Ganoderma mushrooms. If you think of sort of like our northeastern reishi, so you can do a bunch of different types of infusions. Tailor it to your needs, the kind of oil that you prefer or that you think would be better for your skin, and you could formulate that yourself into your own sort of healing blend, or even just a daily cream or something for hydration. So that's fantastic.
I've just been awed by this plant. Mm-hmm. So I definitely have a relationship with this plant. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'd say you have a plant ally for sure. That's amazing.
I feel that way. So you've done tremendous amounts of research, clearly, to be able to find sustainably, ethically, organically sourced materials. I'm wondering if you have any first of all, I want to make sure that people know how to find you. And I want to know if you create custom infusions for people or custom formulations for people. So maybe you can share your website, the best way to get in touch with you. And because I imagine that you're probably piquing the interest of many people who would like to be able to take advantage of natural medicine, especially because you have come from needing to solve issues that so many people have. I also grew up very allergy challenged and having asthma and all kinds of sensitivities and autoimmune issues. And it sounds like you've combated them. I'd love to talk a few more minutes about how you've gotten past that. But first, what is your website?
My website is bluefoxbotanicals.com. My business is Blue Fox Botanicals LLC. The logo is a blue fox, as you can imagine.
Why a blue fox?
It's really kind of simple and juvenile. I love the color blue and I love foxes. I always found like I had dreams about foxes a lot. Like when I was sick, I would dream about a sick fox. Like even when I was little, and I always felt like I don't know, like whenever I saw one, it was a really good sign, assuming it was alive when I saw it.
Yeah, right.
So, no, that might be a bad sign, but yeah, so it's bluefoxbotanicals.com, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well. And yeah,
and you have an Etsy store.
Yeah, so the Etsy shop is Blue Fox Botanicals, and it links through the website. So if you go to the website, it's sort of like right on the front page, and there's a couple different places where you can link to it. And so everything I make is in sort of seasonal micro batches. So sometimes, I'm out of something. Sometimes, I try to restock when I can, but a lot of it is with respect to like what I have available, like what's in season, what I'm foraging, what I'm growing in the garden, that sort of thing. But I'm usually pretty responsive. So and I like talking to people about plants and mushrooms. So even if it's just like a question or, hey, can you recommend this book? Or what do you think of this? Like you said, custom infusions, actually someone did ask me that once, and it ended up becoming something that I started making more frequently, which is something for muscle and pain relief. But I'm definitely open-minded. I definitely encourage people, if you have the means to do so, to, be actively involved in your own wellness, and don't feel like, you don't have a right to take care of yourself or to explore plants and plant medicine. But I do understand too that the process can be a lot if someone's juggling, work, kids, that sort of thing, and doesn't really like feel like they want to make their own infusions, because there's some steps involved, and you're gonna have to develop a recipe and that sort of thing. So if that's not something that you're into, I'm happy to help. And if there's something like in particular, like what you said, like a custom blend, I'm happy to make that as well. So yeah, thank you.
Sure, of course. And as far as I know, that it's probably taken you quite some time to develop your sources. So I understand if you don't feel comfortable sharing them, but are there any places that you can recommend and feel comfortable about it without violating any of your trade secrets to those of us that might want to be making our own infusions, where to source sustainable and ethical and fair trade organic materials?
I would say, so this is an interesting one too. This does change, and I'm very thankful that you touched upon how much work it takes and how much research it takes, because I was delving in this for years before I ever started making products for the public and selling them, into researching the different distributors and how and where the plants are coming from. It changes. It really changes. And that's something I've found, is that, businesses that are fair trade and organic, I will just say, look for that and then dive into that. And I'm not saying that a certification is a be all and end all, because that's often something that a local herbalist like myself has a harder time getting, because we're not a bigger company, and it costs a lot of money to do that. But that's something to look for, or at least looking into as locally as you can, and just really just doing your research. The great thing about the time we're living in is people are so open and honest with their reviews. you can Google a lot and find out all these things. And that just really do blow your mind, sometimes not for the better, but I would say to just look into that and reassess it, because I've had, things that I've used, and then I go back to try to find it and then find that they have gone out of business. More often than not, that's what ends up happening, is because it's expensive to do the right thing, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of turnover in companies. So I end up going through a lot, but there's women's run collectives in Ghana that, just look into that. There's a few different ones, but they have shea butters and cocoa butters that are processed with water, that are organic, that are owned by women, that are certified fair trade. So looking into that, that's, I guess, maybe more general than what you wanted, but it is something that's constantly in flux, especially now with the way the economy is, and everything that's going on globally. There's a lot of companies that are sort of coming and going.
So you mentioned, and I've forgotten which exact oil or wax it was that you said that you don't use because it's processed with acid.
So candelilla wax. So
candelilla wax.
So it's, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. But it's something that is a reminder that, just because something's vegan, again, or plant-based, does not automatically mean that it's ethical or sustainable or safe. And I think that is something that blows some people's minds every now and then. But candelilla wax is one of those that, unless it's changed in the last year, because that's kind of when I stopped doing research into it, I had sort of just been like, I'm not using this. I couldn't find an organic or a fair trade supplier of it because sulfuric acid is used. It comes from a plant in the deserts of Mexico, and people are not paid fair wages. There's no PPE involved. There's children as young as 10 years old that are engaged in this, and that acid, the sulfuric acid, is getting dumped back into the desert, and it's a very dirty process. It's not respectful of the people or the land or the plant. And again, if people have their own priorities, their own morals and values, for me, that wasn't something I could get down with, or that I could stomach at all. So
I'm wondering,
if it doesn't check off all those boxes of being safe and ethical and sustainable, then there's no point in me doing what I'm doing.
I love that. I love that you have such strong conviction of your beliefs, and that you're really following it down the chain to be able to make something sustainable. I'm wondering if there are other ingredients that you would include in that list of things that you just don't use because you can't tick off all the boxes.
Carnauba wax is another one I wouldn't use. That by and large comes from Brazil, from the Amazon. You see that used in like car waxes, but it's also used in so it's used in heavy industry stuff, like mechanical stuff, but it's also found sometimes in like lipsticks and eyeliners, mascaras, I think sometimes use it. That one I would stay away from, because that's a deforestation issue by and large. And then there's also fair trade issues with that also. And also it's not necessary. There's certain things that you really don't need to use in a blend. It's used because it's an emulsifier. It's a strong emulsifier, which keeps a blend that you're making topically harder and stable for longer. But that comes at a price, and I'm not willing to work with things like that. So that's really the only other one I can think of right now. There's other things where, like anything, there's better or worse versions of it being harvested or used. So it's tough because it tends to not always be black and white.
The more you know, the less black and white things are. Isn't that the truth? Really,
definitely.
really. Yeah.
And then it gives you a headache and then it leads you down that rabbit hole into, what else? And then before you know it, you're like really reassessing like who you are and what you're doing. And you're having like an existential crisis every time you do this research. But I think it's a good, because that's what we need, is to sort of like zoom out from our own little microcosm that we've created and see how, everything we're doing within our immediate vicinity is impacting the rest of the world and other people. And it's frustrating because you just think, if everyone just thought of this, then maybe, we wouldn't be facing some of like the, environmental crises that we are facing, unfortunately. But that's kind of how it starts, I think, is, individual people making these decisions who do value, the planet and ecosystems and, ancestral traditions. And the more that people learn and dig into this stuff, the more you find out. And I certainly don't know everything, that's for sure. It's never ending. I mean, and not just as a human being, but as an herbalist or anyone who works with plants, your learning is for forever. We can't ever possibly know everything there is to know. And I think that's really humbling. And so your growth is continuous, and through those experiences and that research, you hone your skills through time. And I'm just excited because I always try to think like, who am I going to be in like 30 years? What am I going to be like? And just hopefully, more skilled and knowing more. So hopefully more plant friends will be made along the way too.
I have two more questions. One is, do you make your own lipstick and mascara or your own makeup?
I, before the pandemic, stopped using any of that stuff. I only use a lip tint that I make that has, the pigment is achote, which is, or annatto seed. And that I got in person the last time I went to Costa Rica. So from a family owned farm that's organic. And it's just the family members run this farm in the South, like Pacific part of the country. And it's used by people in the region and as far down as South America for different ritual ceremonies, but it's a natural colorant. It's a natural dye. Commercially now they use it as, food coloring and that sort of thing. But there is a, sort of deep ancestral practice that involves this particular plant and the seed specifically. So I use that with coffee infusion to make, and again, organic fair trade Peruvian coffee. And I use that in combination to sort of make this like gentle tint. And I add that to like a lip balm base because I do make different types of lip balms, none of them with essential oils, which some people are like, oh, it doesn't smell like anything. And I'm like, well, that's because there's no essential oils in it. And so you have to sometimes sacrifice that aesthetic for the bigger picture of what it's doing to your skin, what it's doing for the environment. So that's what I do as like a lipstick. It's not really a lipstick though. It's like a lip tint. And it's very gentle. And that's really the only cosmetic, I guess you could say, that I make or that I use.
That's amazing because you look like you have magnificent skin and gorgeous coloring.
Oh, thank you. Maybe it's getting darker in here, so maybe it's a bit more flattering. But yeah, I think that's also drinking a lot of water.
Okay.
To find out. So that's sort of holistic approach to medicine,
Exactly. I do want to know, is there, like, have you treated your asthma and allergies herbally?
So that's a holistic move on my part. So cutting out inflammatory products and foods, going more towards the anti-inflammatories, drinking more water, more exercise, and exposing myself more to what's out in nature. I mean, I always love the woods and I was always out in the woods, but consuming more of the plants and the fungi that I found. And it was sort of like this gradual process. I worked with lobelia. I worked with, like different, nettles are a big one. I worked with borage for a bit and anise hyssop and, just kind of finding combinations of teas. Mullein. Oh, I couldn't even believe I almost forgot mullein. Mullein is a great one. I love mullein. And so just finding different teas that I can make, or herbal teas, or I should say infusions. That's really the proper term. But different plant infusions that I can make with water that use these plants that are great for respiratory function, in combination with eating foods that are more anti-inflammatory.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, it was like a lot of different little things, but it makes a difference after a while.
Oh, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. I was wondering if you have some resources that you could suggest to people that are interested in learning more about these plants. I know that there are wonderful, wonderful herbal tomes out there, but I'm wondering if you have any particular favorites.
Oh, wow. That's really hard. That's really, really hard. There's so many good authors and good books out there. I have like a lot of things by Rosemary Gladstar are really great, especially, at an introductory level for sort of learning the full gamut of, tinctures, extractions of different types, harvesting. There's also a book, and this is more science-based, but this was actually something that I went to a lot early on when I was practicing, which is the Herbal E-Commission. It's a guidebook that's put together by, based on German clinical research, because Germany, even more so than the United States, is sort of more of an advocate for like plant-based natural medicine. There's a little bit more of an emphasis on that there in hospitals and clinical settings. So this particular book has, and it's monographs. So it has different, really common sort of herbs and their history. So it starts off with their history and the different, chemical constituents. So it's very scientific in that it sort of breaks down like, well, this is approved for, treating X, Y, and Z based on these compounds. And I would say it's not all inclusive. It's definitely not all inclusive, but it's just interesting to have that in combination with other forms of literature, because it does make mention of the traditional uses, but it also has that sort of science twist to it. That I think is great if you're starting out and you're trying to learn about some of the chemistry behind the plants and how they work. And there was something else I was going to say, but I totally forgot.
Another book, perhaps, or maybe websites that are really awesome resource websites.
Okay. So we were talking about essential oils. So something that might help people is the book. There's different books actually by Robert Tisserand. He's sort of one of the leaders in aromatherapy, and you could also go to aromaweb.com, and they tend to have more sort of like safe practices for essential oils. It's doctors, it's clinical practices. So it's not, you got to be careful sometimes because doing Google searches of like, what does this essential oil do? Or how do I use this? Or where does this come from? Will often lead you to the manufacturer of that essential oil. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, but going with, some sources of people that have been practicing in the field for a long time. And that are informing research, on a large scale, tend to be good sources.
So I want to let everybody know, everybody that's listening, that we're going to have links to these resources on our website. So much, much, much appreciated. And the last thing that I have as a question is about packaging. How do you manage the packaging dilemma? Because I know that the cosmetics that I purchase for the most part are in plastic packaging. And so I've cut down on my addiction and tried to find other alternatives. But the packaging thing is a big issue.
I agree. That's honestly one of the biggest things I struggle with, because it's really, really hard to find completely, sustainable or recyclable or even reusable containers, because, there hasn't really been, I don't want to say there hasn't been a market for it, because there are people that definitely, demand better packaging, but by and large, it can be tricky, especially when you're selling to people and you want something to be stable. So what I use is I use tins. I just use basic tins. They can be recycled, or they can be reused. I always encourage reuse. Tincture bottles, that's a little bit harder because they have a dropper, and the eyedropper top is rubber. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find a way around that. I've looked into it. The only way would be to, sell it in a glass bottle with a metal cap, and then tell the person that they got to get their own dropper. And that doesn't really work out so well. So what I've started to do recently, and right now it's word of mouth, but I haven't done the marketing push really yet, is I've found a system for doing refills for people at a discount. So if, things like reishi tinctures, which actually is something else that really changed my life as an overall immune support. But so using that regularly, you're going to have that bottle waste. So to cut down on that, the glass is recyclable, the stopper at the top isn't, or the dropper at the top isn't. So doing a refill program where if someone holds on to that bottle, I can refill that tincture and give a discount. And then that's sort of like a win-win, because there's less waste. And then there's also the incentive monetarily to reduce that waste.
Awesome.
So yeah, you got to be creative, and it's nothing's ever like perfect or ideal, unfortunately, as you well know. So you just got to like do the best you can. And every now and then I try to like reassess, or if I, see or hear something that might be better than like what I'm doing, then, I'll jump on it after I, investigate it or research it for a little bit.
Yeah. Well done. Well done.
I want to hear how it works out for you. I really do. Like, let me know how your case study goes with broadleaf plantain. And
I will. And I want to say thank you to everybody who is out there listening and following us. And you're the ones that are carrying the torch, and you're the ones that are making the changes in the world. So I also want to say thank you to our producer and my co-conspirator here at Sustainability Now, Scout Billy. And that's it for today. Live your best life, love the world around you, and together we really can save the world.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now, solutions to shape a world that works. Visit sustainabilitynow.global for resources related to today's program. And be sure to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.